Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of True Scary Stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we are going to be reading True Dating Horror Stories. This will be the final video in our 2023 collab month. I hope you enjoyed all of the collabs that we had this month, and I hope you enjoy the ones that we have today. Today, we are going to be having Interscare Wifey, Dodge the Grave, The Darkest Hour, and 242 Reads, in that order. The links for their channels will be in the description down below. Make sure to go check them out and subscribe to their channels. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you have enjoyed all of the collabs that we have had this month. I know that I enjoyed doing them. But for now, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories.
Valentine's Night Encounter at Lone Beach. This story takes place back in 2016 on Valentine's Day. I took out my girlfriend at the time, now ex, to dinner, and after dinner I drove us to the beach. I always love walking the beach, especially at nighttime, because of the atmosphere and everything. The quietness, the calmness, and the sense of peace. But this night wasn't like the others. I parked the car in the parking lot that hardly anyone ever parks at, since how far it is away from the pier, the lighthouse, and the other sights to see on the beach. I preferred parking here this time because, well, it's Valentine's Day and the privacy is what we wanted. I parked the car reversed into the lot, where we are facing the long road we drive to get to the secluded parking lot. Also to add, that lot is on a small decline with a slight slope to get down into the lot. Her and I are listening to music, and I'm telling my usual scary stories that I find on Reddit and YouTube. We're there for about 30 minutes when, out in the road above and in front of us, we see the headlights of this truck driving towards us fast. At first, I'm not alarmed because I know plenty of people who speed down that road since no cop cars could hide behind anywhere. But my heart skips a beat when I see the truck not slowing down at all when it's about to enter the parking lot. I swear that the truck was in the air for just a few moments since they didn't slow down to the drive down the slope. I tell my girlfriend to get down in her seat, and so do I, as I don't want the driver to see us in the car. I get my keys ready in the ignition just in case the truck wants to stop in front of us. I've seen plenty of horror movies and many stories, and I don't feel like being the Zodiac copycat killer's next victims at Lover's Lane. To ease my girlfriend, who I know was freaking out, I jokingly tell her that some people are just in that much of a rush to get some Valentine's Day special treatment. She doesn't laugh. The truck zooms past us and parks crooked in the nearest lot to where the sand on the beach starts, around 50 yards away from us. Immediately, 3 men jump out of the truck, and all of them run directly into the water, shouting out loud. Since this was 9 in the evening, they disappear into the darkness. Just for a reference, the parking lot is about 100 yards away from the shoreline. All is now quiet again, and my girlfriend and I can finally take a breath of fresh air. But no more than 3 minutes later, the 3 men jump back in the truck again and speed away, never to be seen. Her and I had enough spooks for the night, so we drove away. The next day at work, I tell one of my coworkers the story during lunchtime, and she pulls out her phone to see if there's anything posted yet online. She immediately finds the article that I would post below this story, but the subreddit doesn't allow screenshots or link attachments. To summarize, the news article said, a man was stabbed Sunday night on the Hunamine Pier. The incident happened about 9:15 p.m. The victim was a 20-year-old Oxnard man. Police said the victim was attacked by 3 men. There was no doubt that the men in the truck were responsible. The only reason why I didn't contact the police is because at that time in my life, I didn't know anything about cars, models, and makes, so I couldn't even give a simple info to the police. Also to add, since with how dark it was in the parking lot, I couldn't even see the men's face or any other key descriptions that they had. And for those wondering why I didn't get out of the car to take down the license plate, well, I didn't feel like being the next victim in whatever those people were doing. My theory for why the men drove to our parking lot and ran to the beach is so they could wash off any evidence leading them to the attack.
Hi. My name is Anarchist Effigy, and my Let's Not Meet story is titled, No, 55-year-old man, I don't want to date you. So, I am a very, very active skater, and I often go out to street spots to try to skate them. A lot of the time, I meet some less than unsavory people, but this time, it took the cake. Now that the introduction is done, let's set the scene. It's around 6:30 p.m. Perfect day for skating. And I'm just getting a spot around a public park called Rosa Park Circle. I was doing my thing when this tall man came up to me and told me that I was doing a good job. Jay is the creepy man who said his name was Jay. M is me, Satan himself.
Hey, you're doing a really good job.
Hey, thanks. I've been working on skating for a while now, and I think I've been doing a really good job recently. I tend to trust people too much.
Well, what you're doing is a really good job. My name is Jay, 55 years old, and bi.
At this point, I kinda knew what was coming. I'm very good at detecting people's implications, thankfully. Throughout this entire conversation, he kept mentioning his sexuality, and I tried my absolute best to try to get out of the conversation when I could. I was trying to do a few tricks down a small ledge. The guy was just staring at me while I was doing it, and I felt super uncomfortable. He pulled me aside one more time, and this is what he said.
I really like you. I know that you're only 15, but as long as you consent, we can still hook up.
No, we can't. I'm only 14, and the consent age in this state is 16. I'm not really feeling very comfortable with the things they're saying, and I need to go home very soon anyways. It was nice to meet you, but I need to leave.
Okay, but remember, not to tell anybody.
This happened today, and I told my parents. And after they get off the phone with my sister, they're going to be making a police report about this man. I was extremely livid on my way home, and it didn't help that my entire playlist on YouTube is full of hard rock. So, Jay, let's not meet. Update. I went back to skate again, but he was there. He told me that we were such good friends and that he was drunk and that he was sorry. I skated past and looped around and took a picture. I think he was still drunk because he straight up rattled off his name. My mom's on the phone with the detective. So, Leon, let's not meet.
The Homecoming Date from Hell, narrated by The Darkest Hour. Up until junior year of high school, I flew mostly under the social radar, stuck to my status as a nerd girl. But when I was 15, I joined varsity cheer. My school's cheerleaders weren't popular by definition, but everyone kind of knew who we were because we were on the announcements, performed at pep rallies, and generally engaged with students a lot. I made a lot of friends that year. Some of them happened to be the cool kids. For a while, I thought this was my long-awaited karma payoff for the years of bullying I'd suffered at their hands. I even developed a crush on one of them. A crush which the junior cheer captain herself volunteered to help me pursue. Homecoming is a big deal where I'm from, and I began to fantasize about my crush asking me to go with him. I'd heard rumors that he was planning a dramatic proposal, and as homecoming season approached, I became more and more sure that I would be his date. The junior cheer captain, who was close with him, kept dropping hints that I was right. One day at practice, she asked me what my favorite candy was, and I knew it would be so my crush would know what to give me. You can imagine my surprise when, after an exhausting theater rehearsal, I walked into the parking lot and was confronted by a guy I'd hardly spoken to. He was asking me to be his date. My theater friends all applauded, assuming I was overjoyed. I saw both of my parents in the parking lot, recording the whole surprise. But most importantly, the cool kids that I'd recently befriended, they were standing there, right behind him, egging him on. I didn't understand why, because he wasn't popular at all. In fact, he was known to be kind of creepy. The junior cheer captain was laughing, encouraging him to give me the box of my favorite candy he was holding. She definitely orchestrated the whole thing. I didn't really know the guy, but I didn't want to humiliate him in front of the coolest kids in school, so I faked a smile, rolled with it. I promised myself I'd deny him later, in private, so he wouldn't be embarrassed. Afterwards, when my parents excitedly asked me how I felt about the ordeal, I explained how uncomfortable it made me. I said that I got strong, creepy vibes from the guy. That didn't fly with my parents. My mother accused me of having expectations too high. And my father demanded to know, not for the first time, if I was secretly a lesbian. I'd never had a boyfriend or shown much interest in dating. To make his case stronger, I'd just become best friends with the only openly gay girl our school had ever seen. Long story short, I knew if I shut down my date, I'd effectively declare war on my parents. However, I played my dad's protective instinct against him and persuaded him to let me friend-zone my date. After all, he knows how high school boys think, right? I text my date that night, explained that I only saw us as friends, but would still be happy to go to homecoming with him. He was very polite about it, although I could tell he was interested in me romantically. It seemed that we'd reached a deal until the next day at school, when one of my cheerleader friends referred to my date as my boyfriend. I corrected her, told her that we're just going to homecoming as friends. She seemed confused, told me that my date was telling anyone who'd listen I was his girlfriend. A few more of my friends approached me with similar comments, and I confronted my date about them. He denied all involvement, suggested that it was a rumor. I reminded him that we were just friends. I had zero romantic interest in him. He said he understood. I got a call from the junior cheer captain. She pretended to be sweet, but conspiratorial. And I was still annoyed that she'd led me to believe my crush would ask me to homecoming. She began to attempt to persuade me that I was wrong to friend-zone my date. She said that she'd spent many afternoons planning his proposal with him. And she knew he was kind of creepy from afar, but he was sweet and caring underneath it all. I said, if he's such a catch, she should date him. Annoyed, she dropped the sweet act. She told me that I had to date him because he liked me so much and he'd gone to so much trouble to ask me to homecoming. I had to give him a chance because he'd gone out on a limb for me. I told her she was wrong, and I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to do, and I owed him nothing. I ended up hanging up on her soon after that, but that was just the beginning. Starting the next Monday, he would corner me in the hallway, give me a rose that he held in his teeth. He usually did so in between my 6th and 7th periods, when my path through the hall crossed his. I was deeply uncomfortable with this, and I told him so, but he wouldn't stop. I took different routes to escape him, but The junior cheer captain and her posse, they made a point of tracking me down so he could find me elsewhere. Every time he did this, everyone in the area would treat it as a sweet, romantic gesture, despite my obvious discomfort. Wouldn't any girl be so lucky to have a boy so devoted to her that he gave her a rose every day? He was still telling everyone I was his girlfriend. The final straw for me was when he walked into a class that he wasn't in to find me and give me my daily rose. My teacher, who was friends with the junior cheer captain, let this happen. For weeks afterwards, she would ask me about my date every day. When he came in, I told him to get out, to leave me alone. His feelings were clearly hurt. He left looking like a kicked puppy. My classmates started calling me a cold, hard bitch. It didn't matter what I had to say about him. I was an ice queen, refusing this sweet boy's advances. Everyone in the school had decided that I was in love with him, and nobody cared what I had to say about it. My crush, who was part of the popular group, joined the cheer captain, pressuring me into returning my date's feelings. At every event where the cheerleaders were present, my date would push his way to the front of the crowd. He would go to great lengths to get my attention. At football games, he would wave a flag in the student section, so I'd look at him when we were cheering. The other girls would make comments on how endearing he was when he waited in the parking lot by our bus back to the school, just to hug me, tell me how great I did. I didn't know what else to do other than let this happen. I'd only recently ascended to a position of visibility. If I conflicted too hard with the cool kids who were so dead set on setting me up with this guy, I could be an outsider all over again. I hoped that if I just kept ranting to my real friends about how creepy he was and publicly let him do what he wanted, it would all blow over. My school had a 15-second attention span, so some scandal had to one-up me sooner or later. The truth emerged, as usual, in the locker room. It turns out the junior cheer captain had been telling him, my date, during their afternoons together, that I was into him. He'd come to her for help, announcing his crush on me. And she'd gone a step further and convinced him that I felt the same, despite the fact that I didn't even know his name. She'd lied to him for weeks prior to the homecoming proposal, and when I told her that was wrong, she didn't care. She told me I should be grateful because everybody was starting to think that I was gay. My best friend, the lesbian who was starting a gay revolution, and I felt inspired, spread a rumor that we were dating. After all, everyone already thought I was gay, right? But my date wasn't fazed. In fact, he told everyone that he'd just turned me straight again. Ew. 3 weeks after he asked me, it was finally homecoming night. Thanks to cheer obligations and a complete coincidence involving a switched backpack that left me without a dress, I ended up only attending the dance for half an hour. My date awkwardly stood on the side of the room while I danced my heart out to Mr. Brightside. I almost felt bad for him when, right at the end, the junior cheer captain appeared like a summoned demon to suggest that we slow dance the next opportunity. Thank God I escaped that one by walking to the DJ and suggesting he play Footloose. My date walked me out to the parking lot to wait for my mom to pick me up. While we waited for her to drive around, which took entirely too long because she still hoped I'd stop making a fuss and date him, he asked me out. I politely declined. He quickly stammered that we could go with a group of friends, like the junior cheer captain and my crush. I denied him again. I made it clear that we were only friends, and that I wasn't interested in romantic endeavors because I was too busy. That was actually true. I was in all advanced classes, varsity theater and cheer, worked part-time. A few days later, a teacher eloped to Vegas and nobody cared about my love life anymore. My date and I were distanced again by classes and activities and work. It appeared that everything was going back to normal. That Friday at the football game, my crush asked me to sit on his shoulders for the alma mater, kind of a romantic thing at my school. Overjoyed, I accepted, and I hoped this was the beginning of a new chapter for me. I ignored the frantically waving flag in the stands. Monday, my date stood on a chair in his second period class and announced that everyone should be wary of my crush because he would steal your girl. I heard everyone buzzing about it a few hours later, when someone called me a bitch, again, for breaking my date's heart. I knew I was being dramatic, but I decided not to go to lunch that day, terrified of running into him. I'm so glad that I didn't. Later, I saw on Snapchat that my date had carved my name into his arms with a pair of scissors. His bleeding arm was screenshotted and sent to me by half a dozen people, most of them demanding why I'd hurt him like this. He did it in the middle of lunch, in a crowded cafeteria, and somehow no administration noticed or cared. The school was buzzing. My date was a broken-hearted victim, and I was the evil, secretly gay bitch who wouldn't give him a chance. I got so many dirty looks. By fifth period, I was ready to just walk out, but my good girl instincts kicked in. I decided to just tough it out for 2 more hours. Around that time, I got a panicked text from one of my cheer friends. While she'd initially been insistent that I date the creepy guy, she apparently changed her mind after the lunch incident. She told me that my date, who was in her 5th period class, was going off the rails. He'd started out saying that he wanted to kill himself because I wouldn't love him. This had escalated to saying that he'd kill my crush for lying to me and stealing me away. Finally, he'd started talking about how he knew where I lived. My parents had given him my address when he initially wanted to ask me to the dance at my house, and he said he would make me pay for wronging him. I knew that after 6th period, our paths through the hall would cross. Since the beginning of this ordeal, the school had cracked down on students getting outside, and my alternate route to escape him was no longer an option. My class was at the far end of the hall, with nowhere to go but the central hub, and he would be coming from the other end of the hallway, towards mine. I was stuck up a chimney, basically. Desperate, I text the junior cheer captain to finish what she'd started, tell him that I was not and had never been interested in him. She'd made this mess, and I'd make sure that she had to clean it up. She said that she'd go to the counselor, but she didn't know what else to do. This was beyond her control now. For the first and only time, I skipped class. I hid out in the theater hall, waited for 7th period. I got a few texts during the passing period that my date was waiting for me by the bathrooms. There was a little alcove right before where you can't see people coming around the corner, and the thought of him hiding there, waiting for me to walk by alone, horrified me. Right before 7th period started, a few of my classmates burst in, cackling, proclaiming that my date was coming down here after school to kill my crush. They thought it was hilarious, but judging by the look on my crush's face, this wasn't a joke to him anymore. Our teacher brushed this off as typical theater drama. I watched the clock and tried not to cry, knowing that by the time the bell rang, my date would be outside, waiting for me and my crush to emerge. That day ended up being a work day, so my crush and I were able to escape the classroom, hide out elsewhere in the theater hall, just to get away from him. He opted for the black box theater. I went for the lighting closet. Obviously, I didn't witness what happened, but my best friend filled me in afterwards. Allegedly, my date had turned up 3 times before the bell rang. stood outside the classroom where we couldn't see him when we opened the door. He told everyone standing around that he was ready to have a knife fight with my crush. We don't know if he had a knife or not, but the idea that he might was enough to terrify me. His arm was wrapped in paper towels that he was bleeding through. My best friend told him that my crush and I were gone, but he didn't believe her. He stood outside for 25 minutes until the administrators began walking through to make sure that no one was in the school who shouldn't be. My date wasn't in theater, so he wasn't allowed to stick around. That night, I texted him that not only would I never date him, but could no longer even see a friendship between us. I sent him a number to a suicide hotline, told him to get help. Finally, I told him that he needed to learn what no meant, and I never wanted to speak to him again. He responded that he was sorry, asked if there was anything he could do to fix this. I told him no. I don't think he learned the meaning of that word after all, because the same pattern repeated itself a few months later on Valentine's Day, the next year at homecoming, senior year Valentine's Day, and prom. But those are other stories. I've since graduated, gone off to college, hundreds of miles away from him. My family back home moved from the address my parents gave him. Contrary to popular belief, I'm not gay. My crush, on the other hand, came out a few months later, and we were friends for the rest of high school. I'm working on handling romantic endeavors in a healthy way, but he got in my head. He was the first person to ever show interest in me. Ironically, the last time I saw him was my first and only homecoming game after graduating. But this time, I had true friends to defend me when he predictably tried to pull some weird stuff with me. The worst part, looking back, was somehow being at fault for everything. To this day, people from my high school reference the whole ordeal as that time you wouldn't date that poor shy kid. I can't even appreciate red roses anymore. So, homecoming date from hell. Let's not meet again.
My coworker asked me to get lunch after our shift. Now, it wouldn't have been considered a date then, but he had gone around telling all the kids at work, we were camp counselors, that he was taking me on a date. He was cute and nice, and I was excited. We got into his car after work, and his first question was, "So tell me about your dating history." A little odd, but maybe he was just nervous or awkward. We chatted for a bit until I got a call on his phone, which was connected to his Apple CarPlay. Now here's where it gets bad. The contact appears as a simple heart emoji. No name, no nothing. I assumed it was his mother until I pressed the accept and a young girl's voice booms over the car's speakers. "Babe, where are you? Are you on your way?" Definitely not his mother. My jaw literally dropped and I start to put the pieces together. As I open my mouth to alert the poor girl that her boyfriend is taking another girl on a date, he legitimately slaps his hand over my mouth, not letting me talk. "Oh yeah, babe, I'm with the boys right now. I'll be there soon," he hurriedly said, and he gave me a death stare. Was I going to be kidnapped or something? He hangs up with his girlfriend and takes his hand off my mouth and carries on with whatever he was talking about before, like it didn't even just happen. I'm in shock as I asked him why he's taking me on a date if he has a girlfriend. He reassures me he's about to break up with her. Yeah, no, I don't play that. I had him drop me back saying I had a family emergency and never talk to him again at work.
This happened to a friend of mine. One night, we were talking about some deep stuff, and he brought up a time that he was dating a Satanist. I asked him why they quit dating, and he proceeded to tell me this story. So one day, he was over at her house, and they were chilling in her room. They started talking about religion and other stuff like that when she mentioned that she was a Satanist. He previously didn't know. And she could do stuff with a Ouija board. He thought that she was just trolling him and laughed it off, so she was like, "No, I'll prove it," and got this board out. He still thinks she's playing around, but suddenly she takes off her clothes and obviously stuff happens. So right after they finish, she says, "That was step one." By the way, activities like that are often used before satanic rituals. He still thinks she's playing and starts laughing, so she pulls out the board again and asks him, "What do you want me to summon?" I forgot what he said, but I think Napoleon or something. She then lights these candles and proceeded to say something along the lines of, "Move this. I know you can hear me." He swore on his life that it moved, and then and there he realized this wasn't a joke. He told me he was petrified when he saw this, so he falls to his knees and starts praying. He's a Catholic, by the way. And he said the candles for the ritual went off. She gets mad about it and runs out of the room. Long story short, he left her after that. I'm leaving out details and making this incredibly vague on purpose to protect myself and Joe. I met a guy on the internet, and we were online friends for a few years, playing video games and such. He was a bit of a jerk, but me and him got on extremely well, despite being opposites. I can't describe it without sounding stupid, but he was different around me, and I reached him in ways nobody else could. Me and him were something else, and we had great times. I still miss him when I think about those times. He had a lot of problems, including a bad drinking problem. He would get drunk and confide in me about awful things that had happened to him. Sometimes he would make very violent comments and expressed how much he wanted to hurt people who had hurt him. It freaked me out, but I felt so bad for him. One time he got very drunk and confessed that he was a murderer. Joe said he was walking late at night one time, and two guys tried to mug him. Joe was a very big guy, and when one of the guys pulled a gun on him, his fight or flight response kicked in. He picked the guy up bodily and threw him off of something. I'm leaving the details out, but Joe said there was no way the mugger could have survived the fall, and that he knew he killed him. The other would-be mugger got scared and ran away. Joe never told anyone or the police. The stuff Joe confided in me usually had me in tears. They were so horrible. This had me very freaked out. I told him it was technically self-defense, but the fact that he never went to the police about it didn't look good for Joe. I wanted more than anything to believe he was lying, because it was scaring me, but I knew that he was telling the truth. Long story short, Joe quit drinking for 6 months, and I didn't realize until far too late that he did it specifically for me, because he was in love with me. He had so many problems, and I felt so unsafe with him, that despite how much I cared about him. Eventually, he started drinking again, got into trouble, and grew very bitter and angry with me because I didn't reciprocate his feelings. He started verbally abusing me and threatening me, saying he would kill me or would kill my whole family. It was mildly terrifying at times. I'm beyond thankful that I never told him my full name, and never ever told him where I lived. It's the only time to date that I have ever ghosted someone, but I blocked Joe on everything and haven't heard from him since. I've seen his username online and ran into mutual online acquaintances since then, but because I changed my usernames, he never knew it was me. So that's my stupid story. Not that scary to read, probably. Was very scary to go through in real life, trust me. Be careful online, and don't tell people where you live. I'm a middle-aged woman now. I've posted many true stories under this subreddit. I've also gotten into the habit of listening to narrators read true scary stories at bedtime. I've always been interested in frightening things, starting with creature feature movies as a young child. Please forgive my snobbiness now, but there are a lot of stories that don't scare me, like where a girl was walking alone and a man came up to ask if she was single, or someone was followed around high school by this weird kid for years. Those just don't scare me. It's probably because I've had so many scary experiences. I invite you to read them as much as you like. Granted, some of them are due to me making really stupid choices, like in the story I'm about to tell. But a lot of them are just misfortune, maybe. So like I said, I'm middle-aged now, so this happened well before there was an internet. There were no cell phones, no email, no online dating apps. But even though we didn't have that when I was a kid, I still managed to do something like those stories you hear about meeting a stranger from the internet. By the way, I'm all for meeting people from the internet, as long as you've taken the time to get to know them first, and your first few meetings are in public places. Don't do what I did. I did this because all my life, as long as I can remember, I was called boy crazy. I liked boys, and thought that I wanted a boyfriend from as early as 3rd grade. That's why this happened when I was 11 or 12. Somehow, I had gotten my hands on a CB radio. That's what truckers use to communicate with people while spending hours and hours driving. Maybe they still use them. But I had this CB radio, and it was just the coolest thing in the world to me, to think that I could talk to anyone from anywhere through the magic of this technology. So I just started talking. I talked to many, many people with no idea of who they were or where they were. One day I was talking to a man who was about 19 or 20, and he was in my city. And while I was only around 12, and always honest about my age, I didn't think of a 19 or 20-year-old guy talking to me as creepy then. I thought of it as more flattering. That was because I liked boys so much. He was flirting with me on the CB radio, and he asked if he could come over and see me. I wanted to meet him because he was a guy. Please understand, I was pretty sheltered back then, and at this time, I really didn't know anything about sex. So when I wanted to meet this guy, or any guy, the most I ever thought would happen would be a chaste kiss, mouth closed. But the idea of getting a kiss was really exciting to me, and I really didn't think age mattered. Of course, as an adult and a parent, I'd probably scalp a 19-year-old who wanted to meet one of my kids at 12. Amidst all of our CB flirting on that afternoon, I told him my address. For some reason, though, I was at least smart enough not to give him my apartment number. So I knew that when he drove up, I could see him and then decide if I wanted to go outside and meet him. He didn't know that I lived in an apartment complex. So when he got there, he parked in the middle and called out for me. I peeked out my kitchen window at him and saw a tall man of probably about 19 or 20 standing outside of a nice sports car. I don't know why, but I lost my nerve. I did not go out to meet him. I just peeked out the window at him until he got back in his car and left. After he left, I got back to the CB radio to apologize, but I was struck speechless to hear him yelling loudly, swearing at me, furious that I stood him up. He was swearing like I'd never heard, and he said that if he ever got a hold of me, he'd kill me. He went on about it, yelling on the public airwaves for quite a long time. Obviously, this scared me a lot, and I couldn't even respond. I don't know where that feeling came from that stopped me from going outside to meet him, because I normally would have done something like that. But I realized soon after, when hearing that temper and what a scary person he was, it was very fortunate that I had not. I didn't know it then, but I realized years later that he was a child predator, and clearly capable of doing very bad things. I've had some pretty scary dating app experiences. One with a guy who looked nothing like the pictures. He used college day photos. His home also looking like a torture house. Ripped walls and window bars. And him making really weird faces. The sexual questions was where I ran for it. Blocked after all the red flags. Anyways, There's a girl I met a long while ago. It never really got off of my mind because of how strange she was. She and I met through a dating app, but whilst talking, she seemed interested, exchanged phone numbers, and immediately chatted over the phone. Except she barely talked, if like ever. It was always like 1 or 2 words. That made me a little uncomfortable. Laughing it off was really all I could do. Well, I was like, yeah, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And that's where she tells me to stop. So I did, and was hoping she would talk about herself. Nope, it was just silence. Good God, I must not be in the right mind either. But I was like, let's FaceTime, because I was starting to question if she was a girl in the profile picture or not. Shockingly, she did, and it was her. Never seen such an expressionless face in my life, though. She looked like there was not an ounce of emotions in her. I don't think I've ever met anyone like that before. Anyway, I just go on to say how shocking it was because I wasn't really thinking she'd be the person on the profile picture because of how pretty she looked. She looked really tired, though. Could literally see the white portion of her bottom eye. She remained silent, which made it feel like there was no progress. So I asked her what she does for fun. She tells me she likes to wait for the rain to come so she could sit there and stare out at it. What a huge red flag. I mean, not that it's inherently a bad thing to do, but the overall vibe was so off. When I literally sat there in silence, expecting her to talk, 10 minutes go by. I compliment her piercing. I receive no response. I just hang up on her because I'm at the point where I'm like, this is just weird. She calls me back immediately, like, what the F? Then asks me why I left her like that. I'm like, I barely know about you. There's really no good communication here. So yeah, and as expected, silence. So I just remind her, oh, there it is again. And she laughs at me. Her laugh wasn't even a laugh, more of a weird, short, sarcastic one. Started to make me question her sanity or intention. I honestly think that she was possibly trolling. Anyways, she finally talks a little bit about her life. It was short, but she lives alone. Doesn't really like to talk. No crap. And never had an interest in relationships, dating-wise. I was cheering, telling her how happy I was that she said a full sentence. I know that's so rude to say, but oh my God, I have better conversations with Siri and Alexa. She tells me to shut up, which is shocking, which I laughed at. She asked me if I had any hobbies. I told her I love art, cooking, and old movies. She said she loved horror movies. And she loved collecting knives. After switching to FaceTime, oh Lord, she had some giant-ass knives, and I was just like, what the F? I happily told her I thought it was awesome, because it was progress. I was, however, low-key terrified. Then silence. I swear to God, her stare was cold and just creepy. So I told her that I had work at 5 a.m., fake excuse, and said I had to leave. She told me don't, so I told her I needed to. So I wished her a good night and left the call. Then I get a text from her at 5 a.m., which I missed because I slept through. I texted back and asked if she slept. She told me she had insomnia and couldn't sleep. I then get a phone call from her, which I answered, wishing her a good morning and asking her how her day went. She was quiet. I asked her if she muted herself, and she just says no. I asked her what she thinks about me. She tells me she doesn't know. So I asked her what I should get to eat. She says nothing. So I just awkwardly laugh it off. Then I ask her if she's met anyone else on the app that we met on after our chat. She says no. She told me they were all old. I laughed and I told her I'm sorry to hear that. I still remember her showing me her knife collection. I remember one of them was a kitchen knife. Anyways, I'm literally talking to myself, hoping she says something. And as expected, nothing. I'm literally awkward holding the phone in silence. Then I hear her singing. She actually had a nice voice and I just cheer. I tell her how happy I am. Just pure silence afterwards. She then asks me why I'm not at work. I told her I decided to skip. She says something that catches me off guard. Aw, for me? I told her no, and she calls me a B word. Oh my God, somewhat funny considering she barely talks. Anyway, I tolerated her silence for like 2 more days before blocking her. Did I dodge a possible psycho? I think the obvious answer is yes. I'm a fairly recently divorced 49-year-old female who decided to try out some dating apps. I went on a few dates with mixed results. However, this one really freaked me out. I matched with a 50-year-old guy. We texted, spoke on the phone briefly, and made plans for a lunch date. The restaurant was in a well-populated, busy area. He got there a few minutes before me and was sloppily chowing down on chips and salsa as I walked up. As soon as I sat down, he gave me a creepy smile. His eyes widened and he said, "Oh." It made me uncomfortable. Red flag number 1. I should have listened to my gut and then left. He had a drink in front of him and immediately asked if I wanted a margarita. When I told him I didn't drink, he seemed very disappointed. He rudely asks the waiter for another drink. Red flag number 2. Rude/disrespectful to wait staff. He started talking about jobs, family, hobbies, etc. When I mentioned that I used to be a social worker, he gets an angry and accusatory look on his face and says, "Well, my daughter's in jail." Red flag number 3. I don't know how to react and I say, "I'm sorry to hear that." His face immediately changes. He smiles and says that's okay. Red flag number 4. He continues to order 2 more drinks while being rude to the waitstaff and making a comment about how they probably don't speak English. As the date is coming to an end, he tells me he wants to see me again. I told him that I didn't feel like we clicked and I wasn't interested. He continues to insist, despite my protests, and says he can take me out on his boat. Red flag number 5. I told him that it appears that he doesn't want to hear the word no too often. He gets aggravated. We pay, leave, and walk out. We're now on the sidewalk, and as I say goodbye, he leans over to kiss me. I hold my hand up and tell him that I'm not interested. He angrily looks me in the eyes and says, "No, you are going to kiss me." He is 10 inches taller than me and outweighs me by at least 75 pounds. I start walking away. He grabs my shoulder. I pull away and say, "What the F? Leave me alone," and jump in my car. I parked close to the front of the restaurant. My head was spinning. I pulled out and looked at my rearview mirror and noticed he's getting into his car. It was parked behind me. The whole way home, I was looking in my mirror to make sure that he wasn't following me. Thankfully, he wasn't. All I could think of was that if he was willing to behave that way on a busy street in broad daylight, what would he act like if we were alone, or in a more secluded area, or on his boat? I immediately deleted him and reported him to the app. Several years ago, before I met my wife, I was going on random dates through eHarmony, Match, etc. Hooked up a few times, went on strange dates, and some that fizzled out before they even got started. But there's one that really stands out to me. Keep in mind, many of my decisions were stupid, I will admit. But that's what happens when the little head thinks for the big head. Plus, add a dose of male ego and bad decisions will be made. I do want to point out that I was a single father with full custody of my son, so I would never take girls back to my place. So I meet this girl, let's call her Beth, through one of the dating sites. We decide to meet at a little bar about 10 miles from my house. We drink a little, we talk, laugh, and flirt. I'm thinking I might get me some. I go to the restroom real quick, and when I get back, she's got a sour look on her face. First red flag. But I didn't know what about. I ask. She says nothing and she starts smiling again. We decide to leave and go back to her apartment, which was just 5 blocks away from the bar, past a hospital. I'm following her car and mine, but instead she pulls into the hospital parking lot. A third car pulls up too. Some guy jumps out and starts yelling at her. Major red flags. I'm standing by my open car door wondering what was going on, and she tells me it's her ex-husband. He won't come near me because he thinks I might pull a weapon from under my seat or door. Smart. He should have just got back in his car and drove away. Male ego me decides I'm going to let her choose. I ask her, do you want me to leave or do you want to go with me? She tells him to stop following her and gets in my car and we drive off. I make sure he's not following me and we end up going to a little motel instead. I'm not gonna lie. Had a lot of fun that night, but this was where things get even weirder. We're in bed talking and come to find out, he was at the bar watching us. That's why she had that look, because she saw him and didn't want to tell me. This next part blew my mind. He lives with her. So I asked her, why would you be taking me back to your apartment if he was there? She skirted around the question but never really gave me a real answer. Red flag. Should have chalked it up as a one-night stand. But little head, stupid decisions. You get the picture. So a couple of nights later, we decide to meet again. She asks if we can go back to my place. As I said before, I don't let that happen, so we decide to go to a motel again. She wants to know which one ahead of time, but I'm still a bit suspicious, so I tell her I'll surprise her. After we hook up, she asks if she can look in my car, because she thinks she might have dropped something last time. I still didn't trust her, so I went with her. I didn't want her digging through my stuff without me watching. She barely looks. She just noticed that I'm watching, so she really won't be able to dig through anything. After that night, I decided I need to break it off soon, because I keep getting a bad feeling. She calls me at work the next day and starts asking me questions, but it wasn't in a conversation type of way. It was questions like she was reading off a list. My name is Chris Velez. Not my real name, it's just for this story. She asked, your name is Chris, right? As in Christopher? Yes. Last name Vela? My gut said just agree, so I said yes. Even though, as I just said, my name was actually Velez. She asked a few more questions, and then I was like, what is this, 20 questions? She said, never mind, I gotta go. See you later. Later, she tells me to go to her apartment, because he has moved out. After discussing time, I ended up getting there earlier than expected. I knocked on the door and she said, hold on right by the door. Then she opened it, and I noticed the vertical blinds all the way across the room were swinging back and forth on the sliding back door. But like I said, she was right by the door, so they couldn't have been swinging that much from where she was standing. More red flags. I still want to hook up more, so I drop it. Later that night, as I'm about to leave, I tell her ex is welcome to come back in from the balcony now that I'm leaving. I really said it to catch her reaction. Just as I expected, she got defensive, saying he wasn't there, instead of taking it as a joke. I let her know that I was joking. Then she said next time we should go to my house. I let her know my rule about my house. The next day I get a text from her saying I'm not texting to say hi. I'm texting to let you know that we shouldn't see each other anymore unless I go to your house. I said, well, we can't, so okay. I get a call from her, but it's not her, it's her ex. I didn't answer because I'm at work. He leaves a voicemail saying not to talk to her again. I should have said okay, but ego got in the way. I texted back and said, only if she says so. He calls again and said I should stop talking to her, or they will find out where I live. At that point, I truly believe it was all a setup from the start. I don't know if they planned on robbing my house or doing something more sinister. Either way, they never got my info, and at that point, I finally decided I should just stop responding. They finally went away, but I think back and wonder what could their plan really had been. I think I dodged a bullet with that one. My friend in the United States told me today that he met a woman in her mid-30s online a year ago and has had a purely speaking and texting relationship for a year. Where it gets strange is she refuses to video chat, and when he flew out to see her, she refused to see him. For some reason, my friend chose to keep dating her. This woman got his mother's number as well, and has been texting her to follow up on my friend whenever he does not reply. Over this year, this mystery woman has got my friend to close his social media accounts, quit his job, and wants him to join AA. She has mailed him flowers, bought him a couch, and recently wired him $4,000. Now this is where we start to go down the rabbit hole. This woman's name my friend has been dating is Jacqueline, but the wire came from a different person named Christina. This was a red flag that my friend finally picked up on. My friend confronted Jacqueline about the name, and she said that she really had a different name and was from back east somewhere. My friend broke up with her, but she still texts him nonstop and he can't let it go. She just keeps digging to find info. But I told him to let it go, as there is something very unusual about this. Jacqueline then contacted my friend's mother to ask if they could meet in person, having never met my friend in person yet, the following weekend, and sent a message, "Money is evil." Fortunately, my friend's mom declined. What is bizarre is this person has not asked for money in the entire year, has given my friend money, she got his bank account info, sent him food and items, she got his address, has been slowly taking over his life. So my mind wonders, what does this person want? Is this a slow scam or something worse, like a serial killer? I've told my friend to contact the FBI. Friday evening, I agreed to meet someone for a drink that I met on Facebook dating. We had several Facebook friends in common, including my ex-husband's first wife, so I figured giving him my cell number was okay. We met up, and while he was pleasant enough, he started going on and on about his connections to very prominent local people / police, etc., and bragging about all of his real estate. We wound up walking to another place a couple blocks away, and he started putting his hand on my thigh and making me uncomfortable. I texted one of my friends when he was in the bathroom, telling her all of this. I had also sent her his profile. I decided to go home because he continued to make unwanted advances, and my spidey senses were going off. I told him he was weirding me out. When I got home, he texted me repeatedly, begging me to call him. Then he called 3 to 4 times. I didn't respond or answer. Yesterday morning, my friend did a little sleuthing on this dude, and he was arrested in 2017 for chomo. He had also given me a fake last name. Then he texted me like nothing happened. I responded that I didn't want to continue and wished him the best. I was honestly a little scared at the point and didn't want to set him off. Well, apparently he's a stalker too, because he called me late last night 6 times between 12 a.m. and 12:30. And twice this morning. I had my ringer off, thankfully. I blocked him immediately, but now I'm concerned. I live alone, and it would be easy to find out my last name via mutual Facebook friends. Maybe I've watched too much Dateline, but I'm very uneasy. I've never had something like this happen before. Anyway, ladies, be safe out there. I went on 2 dates with a guy in his mid-50s. I am a man in my 30s. On the first date, out of the blue, he said things like, "I'm going to make you my boyfriend. I can add you to my work health insurance plan next January when it renews. I want to kiss you," several times while we were eating at the restaurant. On the second date, he said he wanted me to delete my dating apps and that he wants to be exclusive, and a bunch of other weird, intense things I can't remember. I told him he was too intense. It was all too fast and immature, and we barely knew each other. I also told him we were going on dates, but that I'm not his boyfriend, and we are not exclusive after just 2 dates. He was not happy about that and got upset. Despite us having a lengthy conversation on Friday last week about how intense he is, and that I don't want to be in a potentially controlling relationship, and agreeing to slow things down by not seeing each other over the weekend, he continues to be insistent and to say inappropriate things that I think are way out of line for 2 people who have only been on 2 dates. Today, he sent me a message and said, "I want to get to the point where I fall in love with you." This is putting me off, and even though I'm not the type to ghost someone, I don't feel like answering because he clearly doesn't respect me and is ignoring what we agreed, which was to slow things down. He also admitted to taking screenshots of disappearing pictures I sent him on WhatsApp. Just normal, safe for work pictures. I'm starting to feel like he is collecting pictures of me and getting obsessed, which is scary, Is this behavior appropriate? Or am I right to think that there's a big issue/red flag here? Why would someone in his 50s be so immature during their early dating process? I don't know if I should reply, and what I should say or do now. I had been traveling overseas for 2 months whilst talking to a guy from Seeking who lived near me. Long story short, I became fond of him quickly. So after my long-anticipated arrival home, we met up. To my surprise, the picture he used on his profile wasn't him, and his weight was off by about at least 7 inches. To make matters worse, he could not remember what he had told me about his past, often contradicting what he had told me over the phone. He couldn't tell me accurate details about the university he claimed to have graduated from, and when asked about his high school graduation year, he had to think about it, as if he was careful not to mess up the math. He said he played the piano. I play a different instrument, but being fairly versed in music theory, I tried to strike up a conversation about it. Also not true. Finally, he lied about being fluent in a language that I was fluent in, which was awkward to say the least. It's important to mention this is only a few of many lies that I caught on to. Towards the end, he admitted to having given me a lot of thought, and he had feelings for me. But he couldn't remember very important details about me like the school I went to or the sport that I played. After the painfully awkward and frankly scary date, he wanted to go to a well-known luxury hotel in our city that he had booked. He knows all the hotel staff on a first-name basis, and admitting to spending the night there upwards of 70 times in 2022. On top of everything else, this was also alarming to me. If you have a place in the city, why spend so many nights in a hotel? He tried to make me feel guilty for refusing to get in the elevator. Obviously, I didn't want to confront a man I didn't know in person. If he lied about his identity, he can't have good intentions. I really didn't know what to expect from him after seeing him for the first time. To all the young women using this site, please be more careful. I typically am not this careless and won't make exceptions going forward. After the date, I spent the entire night at a friend's house. It's 2 a.m. at this point. They advised me to ghost him, but instead I told him off. He apologized but tried to gaslight me into thinking that I was overreacting. He later admitted to not living in the city. Instead, a suburb outside of it. This is admittedly disheartening to me, seeing that I was looking forward to meeting him for so long. Be safe and trust your gut. So I met a guy online recently that seemed kind and sweet. I decided to set up a date on Friday, and everything was going well. That is, until yesterday. I get a message telling me that he wants to hang out tomorrow morning, and I agree, thinking that we would just go out for Starbucks and he'd come around the time we agreed. I go to sleep with a smile on my face. Instead, I wake up to a phone call at around 8 a.m. Surprised, I answer it and it's my date. Hey, are you up yet? I just woke up. I don't care how you look. Also, your mom freaked me out. My mom? Yeah, she saw me parked across your house. She waved and I waved back. She was kind of creepy. What time did you come over here? 5:30 a.m. My heart sinks. I had no idea that someone I was casually meeting for coffee would show up super early to my house and wait for me to wake up. After the phone call, I check my messages. I see messages from 5 in the morning. A picture of my house with the message, "Do you live here?" The next message he says, "Someone spotted me, so I moved," along with a picture of a neighbor's house nearby. Obviously, I was freaked out myself, and knew that my mother and neighbors were probably equally as freaked out. I start panicking and texting my friends on my phone, desperate to see if anyone was awake and could help at all. I get one reply on a group chat, but out of fear of judgment, I lie to her, saying I got the situation handled. I convince myself to go out and confront this guy. "Hi, princess. How are ya?" I noticed him on my neighbor's yard. probably trying to look for me in their windows. Shaking, I try to fake a smile and let him hug me. He then goes in for a kiss. Wet, messy, and with tongue. I felt frozen on what to do. I try to tell him that coming at 5 a.m. to wait for me isn't a cool thing to do, but he gives me the excuse that he wanted to beat traffic and not drive sleepy, as he works nights. I try to see things from his perspective and shake it off. I go off into his car, and he and I try to have something close to a regular date, which usually doesn't include groping, licking my neck multiple times, and talking about marriage right away so I could have his baby. I managed to convince him to drop me off away from home and let me walk back to my house. That is, until I realized he was following me in his car, and when I asked about it, he asked if I wanted him to walk me to my house. Even more scared, I tell him no and manage to escape. By the time I arrive home, I'm in tears and extremely shaky. I text him that I don't think we're compatible and to never come near me or my family ever again. In response, he tells me that I'm crap. From that, I think I'm going to take a break from online dating. We've all had bad dates, right? This is the only date I've had to date that rang every alarm bell and waved every red flag. I'll preface this by saying I don't go on many dates, but when I do, I make sure that I follow safety protocol by only meeting my date in public places. Let either my family or friends know where I'm going, and park in a populated space close to wherever we meet. Anyway, this date is initially suggested we meet at his house to watch a movie and have a few drinks. And I said no, I don't feel comfortable with that, and I only want to meet in public. He seemed okay with this, but then he brought it up a few more times. And I said if money was an issue, we could meet up another time or forget about it altogether. But my date backtracked and went with the idea of meeting at a cafe that I had chose, that I was familiar with and equidistant to where we both lived. Anyway, he turns up in a 2-door car. This detail is relevant. And goes into the cafe, and I follow behind and introduce myself. After a polite introduction, things begin to get weird. I order a Coke and he says, "Don't you want a drink?" I was going to pop into a bar, which is connected to the cafe, and get one. I say no, I'm not drinking, and he looks at me like WTF, as if I'm being unreasonable. I already explained in messages that I don't drink as I'm on medication, so having to re-explain it again makes me mad. He seems disappointed and goes to order a cider from the bar while I get a table. Anyway, we sit down with our drinks and the date immediately goes on about being back to his place again, even though the original plan was to stay here and order food, and I already stated that was not happening. He says something along the lines of having a few drinks and eating at his place, and I said we don't have to eat, we can just have our drinks and leave. He gets defensive and says he has money, but prefers it if we go back to his. I make a joke and say, "You're not a killer, are you?" And instead of laughing it off, he stares at me uncannily and says, "You don't think I would hurt you, do you?" I laugh uncomfortably and say, "Of course not, but really I'm relieved this date won't be going any further." Date suddenly says, "Are you going to follow me in your car? Because that wouldn't make sense. How about we go in my car? But I've got packages in the front, so you'll have to squeeze in the back, and I'll drop you back off to your car after." In reality, that made less sense than me following in my own car, and then driving home from his house after. The fact it was completely illogical made it even more creepy in my mind. Every alarm bell was going off at this point. I said, "Look, I don't want to go to your house, and your insistence is giving me the creeps." Date looks shocked, mumbles something about needing the toilet and excuses himself from the table. A few moments later, I see him through the cafe window getting into his car and driving off. Massive bullet dodged, in my opinion. Also, the fact his car didn't have back doors made it even more sinister, because imagine if something happened in the car and I couldn't escape. Hello. You can call me Evie. And I wanted to tell my story because it was absolutely terrifying at the time. It all started in the morning of February 14th, 2018. I was in middle school, and the campus was buzzing with life. Guys were running around with gifts for their girlfriends. Girlfriends gave gifts to their boyfriends. Friends exchanged candies. All in all, everything seemed normal. I wasn't popular per se, but I knew everyone and everyone knew me. But I preferred to hang around with a small group of close friends because being around too many people made me anxious. During lunch, I was hanging around my usual group of friends, which consisted of 2 girls, Alex and Mia, and 3 guys, Nico, Adrian, and Elijah. Valentine's Day of all days made me even more anxious because a lot of people would join our group because of my friend Adrian attracted a lot of girls, and my friend Mia was such a sweetheart, and a lot of guys wanted to date her. I began to feel overwhelmed, so I slipped out of my group and headed to a secret hiding place, which was just a bench that was way out in the field, sort of hidden behind some trees. No one really went there, so it was a good place to catch my breath. As I was reading my book, I hear someone getting closer, and I look up to see this guy, Emmanuel. When I see Emmanuel, I instantly started to freak out because he always seemed to have this sort of infatuation with me. Every day he would force himself on me, randomly hugging me, trying to kiss me, telling me he liked me, and believe it or not, I would often see him around my neighborhood. He didn't even live near there. I decided to play it cool and continued reading when he suddenly just grabs my book out of my hands. "Hey, what the heck, man?" I yelled, and he simply responded with, "Sorry, I just wanted your attention." I was still angry, but I tried to calm myself down. "What do you want?" I said. "I really like you, and I want you to be my girlfriend. I swear I'll treat you like a queen." After he said that, he handed me a box of chocolates and a cute stuffed bear. I thought it was a nice gesture, but I really felt uncomfortable whenever he was around. So I told him that even though it was sweet of him, I was already in a relationship, which wasn't true. When the words left my mouth, he turned from being nice and calm to angry. He yelled at me, saying how dare I date someone that wasn't him. I tried to get up and leave, but he tightly grabbed my arm and forcefully kissed me. With tongue. It was gross. I tried pushing him off, but he was stronger than me, so I yelled for help at the top of my lungs, and he quickly covered my mouth. So I bit his hand and kicked him between the legs. While he was shocked, I broke free and ran to my friend group. He yelled behind me, saying that he would force himself on me and then kill me. Obviously, the duty guards heard this and immediately took action, but I just wanted to get the safety of my group. So I kept running until I bumped into Adrian. The rest of my group had separated in order to look for me when they noticed my absence. I hugged him and cried my eyes out. He only comforted me until I was ready to talk. I then told him everything when I was suddenly called into the principal's office. They wanted to know everything that had happened, and the police were called. It was a long day and I just wanted to go home. After I told them what had happened, I was allowed to leave for home early. I later found out that in his house, there was a shrine built for me with pictures of me doing various different things. Walking my dog, eating in my living room with my family, even of me changing. It was horrible and traumatizing. This was 2015. I wasn't actively looking for a relationship, but I would pop onto OkCupid every few weeks to see if anything interesting was in my inbox. Being female, I had a very active inbox. Sorry, guys. I noticed an email from an interesting, fairly local guy. Email was all right, asking about polyamory, which I don't mind talking about if the person asking is sincerely interested and respectful. We got to chatting. I had zero romantic/sexual interest, but thought this could be a friendship. After a few months of chatting, he found me on the Book of Faces. Asked if it was okay to send an ad request, and I agreed. We'd been chatting, getting along well, and he seemed like a nice person. A little weird, but that's okay, because I'm a little weird myself. No big deal. We continued to chat here and there for about 2 years. Send birthday greetings, just casual friendship. He has asked several times to meet, to hang out, etc. I've considered it, but at that time, I was running my own business and working upwards of 70 hours a week, plus maintaining my own home, raising my younger child, and trying to balance 2 partners and an extremely needy, demanding, workaholic client who had no boundaries. 11 p.m. phone calls occurred without a note of hesitation or remorse. On vacation. So, meetup never occurred, but we kept in touch online. Late last year, a news story broke about a man and his girlfriend assaulting and murdering her young teenage daughter. I never connected the name until a friend contacted me and said, "Oh, I see you're friends with X. Did you see the news?" The news stories all use his full legal name, not his nickname. Think Richard versus Dick, which is why I never connected the two. It was him. My then online friend of 2 years had beaten, assaulted, strangled, and then dismembered his girlfriend's teen daughter with the girlfriend's help. He's made several statements since then, stating that he's always had this fantasy and that this child wanted it and that it wasn't fun murdering her, as he apparently thought it would be. It still sends chills down my spine. I dodged a bullet. Big time. Be safe out there. You never know who is on the other side of that keyboard or phone call. About 5 or so years ago, I was 23 at the time, and had just gotten out of my first and only serious relationship a year prior. That guy was my first love, and my first experience. And so, needless to say, when things ended, and he had zero interest in trying to work things out, I was heartbroken. After about a year of moping and being stupidly sexually promiscuous, I decided to try actual dating. I met this guy, Rick, on a dating website. He was a couple of years older than me, was an ex-Marine, was cute and good at making conversation. After a few days of talking online, he asked for my number, and we decided to meet up. I drove to his house, and come to find out, he lived with a few other guys who looked really shady. Now, he actually lived in a good neighborhood, but the way they kept their home and the way his roommates looked was my first red flag that an inexperienced, naive girl would not fit in his crowd. But I decided to stay and give it a chance. Once he saw me, he came up, gave me a hug, and handed me a helmet to his motorcycle. Now, I have never in my life rode a motorcycle before, but I had always wanted to, so I thought why not and hopped on. Now, the street he decides to take me up is known to be a very long and windy road that is pretty secluded. It's also important to note that this is the springtime, and it's about 5 p.m. when we go on our ride. I didn't realize at the time he had decided to take me on that specific road, but once we got on it, my red flag started to kick in. I began to realize that 1, it is dead silent, and there are no other cars on this road right now. 2, it's starting to get dark. And 3, yeah, I don't know this guy, so what the hell am I doing? And my alarm bells start ringing. Now, I will say that while I made a ton of excuses within this story, this instance is where I am proud of how I reacted. Once my anxiety kicked in, I told him that I think we should turn around and go home. He started laughing and asked if I was scared, and I said no, I just needed to head home because my parents are expecting me for dinner soon. He kept riding forward, more alarm bells ringing. Pictures of me being assaulted and lying dead in a ditch came up. I kept asking him, "Can we please turn back? Can we please turn back?" And he finally gave in and turned around. The next day comes and I told myself that maybe I was overreacting and he was harmless, and decided to agree on a second date a few days later. We met up at a sports bar for dinner and a couple of beers so we can catch the hockey game. The entire time we were sitting there, Rick has his arm around me and has me literally attached to his hip, constantly trying to make out with me, and is acting extremely possessive. At this point, I'm completely freaked out because I barely know this guy, and all he is talking to me about is our future and how he would be such a protective boyfriend because he was an ex-Marine. At this point, I knew I was done with him, but unfortunately my car is at his house. When we're done and head home, he insists that I come inside and hang out for a bit. I decide to walk in and stay for 5 minutes. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. We walk into his room and he immediately pounces on me, making out with me and trying to feel me up. I kept pushing his hands away and kept telling him that I needed to get going, but I could tell he wasn't going to give up until he got what he wanted, especially after I realized this little friend was aroused. He told me that he would not leave me until we did something. I had no idea what he would have forced me to do if I kept rejecting his advances. So I decided that my only way out of there was to acquiesce. So I did, and the entire time I'm trying to act like I'm enjoying it while dying inside and hoping he would hurry up and finish so I can quickly leave. Luckily, I only used my hands, and luckily it only took him a few minutes to finish before I literally ran out of the door and sped home. After that night, he tried to ask to hang out again, and I told him that I think it would be best if we stayed friends. This guy began to relentlessly call me and text me and beg me to see him, then proceeded to call me a B word because I was ignoring him, then would apologize for calling me that, and it was because he liked me so much. So I blocked him. Then he tried to message me on Instagram, so I blocked him there, and then on Facebook, and then finally on Snapchat. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope that you enjoyed them. Again, the links for all of our guests' channels will be in the description box down below. Good night, everybody. See you in the next video.